In this video, we're going to talk about how we go from one cell to a multicellular living thing which can have up to trillions of cells, and how that's possible. What has to happen to make that possible? So we'll start with the first very basic unit of all living things, which is a cell. So multicellular living things have specialized cells. So for example, a cell that performs a specific function, and I'll take the muscle cell as an example. So if we have a muscle cell, that means all muscle cells perform one specific function. So now that's what we call a muscle cell. Muscle cell, not muscle tissue. So if we have one cell that performs a specific function, we call it a muscle cell, as an example. But if we have a series of the same type, so it's important that they're the same type of cells that all work together to perform a specific function, we call it a tissue. So for example, if we have one cell, we call it a muscle cell. If you have many, each of these here is a muscle cell. They're all working together to make sure we can contract our muscles. Now we call it a muscle tissue. So whenever you hear the word tissue, it just means many of that type of cell that all work together to perform one specific function. It has to be the same type of cell. So there's muscle tissue, there's nervous tissue, there's connective tissue. All of them are just a series of the same type of cell that all work together to perform one specific function. Now next, what we're going to talk about is an organ. Now here the example will be the heart. Now an organ is a collection of different types, so different types of tissues that work together to perform a vital function to keep an organism alive. So every organ is vital. Without that organ, we wouldn't be alive. And what you need to know is, this is a good example here, the heart. The heart is made up of different types of tissue. So for example, we have the muscle tissue. This allows us to do the actual pumping of the blood. Connective tissue, which is for example blood, this makes sure that the heart cells, so the heart is made up of cells as well. The heart basically doesn't die from lack of nutrients or too much waste. Connective tissue is important too. As nervous tissue, this is the pacemaker. Right? So you have a pacemaker in your heart, and that's done by the nervous tissue. Now these are three different types of tissues that all work together to make sure the heart functions properly. So it's a collection of different types of tissue that all work together to perform one vital function, in this case to pump blood around the body to keep an organism alive. That's what we call, this is an organ. So an organ is a series of tissues that keep working together to make sure that they perform a vital function. The next thing we're going to talk about is the organ system. And if an organ is just different tissues working together, an organ system would be different organs working together. So an organ system is a collection of organs that all work together to perform a series of related functions that are vital in order to keep an organism alive. So if this is your actual digestive system, this is meant to be your digestive system. And the digestive system is an organ system and is made up of different organs. So for example, we have the mouth, which is actually an organ, the esophagus, the liver, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine. All of these are organs, but they're all working together to make sure we break down our food, we digest our food, and then we absorb our food. Right? So each of these organs plays a role in that series of related functions. And if we can't digest and absorb food, we obviously would starve, and our cells would starve, which means we wouldn't be able to keep ourselves alive. So each of these organs work together to keep us alive, and that's what we call an organ system. Now a multicellular living thing, so for example a human, has many organ systems. So we have the digestive system, we have the circulatory system, which is our heart, we have the respiratory system, which helps us breathe. Right? So we have many different systems that all work together to keep us alive. So basically we've gone from the smallest unit, which is a cell, gone from a cell to tissue, which is just a collection of those similar cells that all work together to perform one function. We've gone from the tissue to an organ. An organ is just many different types of tissue that all work together to perform one vital function to keep us alive. Then we go from organ to an organ system, which is basically lots of organs working together to keep us alive by performing one vital function. And then we go from an organ system to an organism, which is a living thing, a multicellular organism, because they need to have many different types of systems to make sure that our body is running smoothly. Right, so that's what you need to know, going from smallest to highest, and what that actually is all about. You also need to know what an autotroph and heterotroph is. Autotroph, auto comes from the word automatic, and troph comes basically from food source, or from food. So a autotroph is a organism, living thing that can make its food automatically by itself. Now one good example would be all plants. So this here is a plant right here. Plants are an example of autotrophs. They make their own food. They can do so by using the photosynthesis, which we'll talk about in a second. Now heterotrophs, hetero means different. So in this case, heterotrophs need to get their food source from somewhere not within themselves. They can't make their own food because troph means food. And examples of heterotrophs would be your herbivores and your carnivores, which are both animals. So all animals are heterotrophs. They need to be able to get their food from somewhere else. So for example, a herbivore will eat grass to get its food, and a carnivore will eat an animal to get its food, but they can't make their own food. Right, so you need to know those two terms, autotroph and heterotroph. You also need to know what role teeth play in digestion and increasing surface area. So we've got mechanical digestion and enzymatic digestion. Mechanical digestion is just if you have a big chunk of food, we break that down through our teeth. So that's supposed to be teeth that I'm drawing here. Drawings are not too good. And those teeth will make that into small bits, and that's mechanical digestion. And that will increase surface area. So that will increase surface area. And the reason why we want to increase surface area is because we want to be able to break that even further. And what's going to break that further is enzymes. That's enzymatic digestion. And in the case of the mouth, that's going to be in your saliva. So your saliva produces something called amylase. That's an enzyme. And if the surface area is bigger, that means these enzymes have more space to actually break down in this case, the starch into maltose, and from maltose into glucose. So the role of teeth in digestion is to increase surface area to make sure that we have more surface area for the enzymes to start that digestion from going from a starch into maltose and then into glucose. Right, that's the role of teeth in digestion. And what we're going to talk about now quickly is two different types of animals. Here we have a herbivore. So for example, your koala bear is a herbivore. These eat only plant products. And on the other side we have a carnivore, for example your wolf or your fox, and these eat only animal products. But if you look at their digestive system, they have many of the same structures, but how complex they are depends on what they're eating. So carnivores only eat meat, and that's easy to digest. Whereas herbivores eat only plant products, so they eat plant products only, and they're hard to digest. Which means hard to digest means you need more time and more complexity. And what you find is a carnivore that eats only meat has a pretty simple layout. It has a stomach, it has a small intestine that's not too long, it has a very short large intestine. So it's a very small digestive system. It has it, but it's quite simple. Whereas again, your koala bear, even though it's smaller, it actually has a lot more to it. So it's got a bigger stomach. Some herbivores have 4-chambered stomachs. They have a much longer small intestine. They have a much longer large intestine, which is that part down here. And that's because they have plant products as their food. Therefore, they need more time for digestion. Therefore, they have to have more complex digestive systems. So you're comparing carnivores and herbivores here. We just talked about autotrophs and heterotrophs. We said autotrophs were animals or plants or some kind of living thing that can make its own food, and they're usually just plants and some bacteria as well. And heterotrophs were animals mostly and other type of living things that can have to get their food from different sources. So photosynthesis is what autotrophs do to make sure they can make their own, in this case, food. So photosynthesis is the production of glucose, and this glucose can then be used later to make energy. We'll talk about that in a second. So the equation you need to know for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of sunlight makes glucose and oxygen. So we said that, again, this whole idea of photosynthesis was to make this glucose, which can then be later made into energy. So glucose, we can compare that to, for example, coal. And I'll show you how that is related to coal in a second. But if we're making coal, coal is a storage form of energy, and then we can burn that coal to release the energy, which we'll do in a second. All right, so glucose is produced by photosynthesis, and that's what your autotrophs will do. They will actually make glucose. They make their own food. But cellular respiration, also one thing that I want to, before I go on, photosynthesis is actually 2 stages. It has a light stage and has a dark stage. So photosynthesis is not just all happening at once, it happens in 2 stages. You don't need to know too much about that, but just know that photosynthesis is where we make the energy needed for the dark stage. In the dark stage, this is where glucose will be made. So glucose will be made in the dark stage, but the energy needed to do that will be made in the light stage, and it's called light stage because that's where light is present. Just realize that it's basically a two-stage process, photosynthesis. Now the other equation which we'll talk about in the next chapter is cellular respiration, but I'll quickly mention here because it's quite important. Cellular respiration happens in all cells, and it's the use of glucose. So we make glucose with photosynthesis. Now we use that glucose to make energy, and usually energy in the form of ATP. So I mentioned earlier that we can compare glucose to coal. So if, for example, glucose is coal, and this is the equation down here. So we've got glucose plus oxygen plus water goes into carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. And I said that ATP was a form of energy. So if glucose is your coal, here we made coal in your photosynthesis, and now we burn coal in your cellular respiration, and we burn it to actually release energy. And if we're doing that in a power plant, we're making electricity out of that coal, but in this case, we're burning the glucose to make energy, and the energy can then be used throughout the body. So all living things need to do cellular respiration to be able to make energy, but the good thing is plants have a chloroplast, and a chloroplast is full of chlorophyll, and this light and dark stage, they happen close to or in the chlorophyll. So if you have chloroplast, you can make your own glucose, which you need to be able to do to make energy. If you do not have a chloroplast, you can't make your own glucose. You need to get it from somewhere else. And plant cells have a chloroplast, whereas animal cells do not have chloroplast. Hence why one is autotroph, the other one is heterotroph. Now, important to realize that both have a mitochondria. Both the plant cell and the animal cell have a mitochondria. So this is a mitochondria of a plant cell. This is the mitochondria of an animal cell. And the mitochondria is where cellular respiration happens. So this idea of burning glucose to make energy is important for both plants and animals, because that's where you're actually going to be able to change your glucose into that energy in the form of ATP that will help you be able to survive anything that it needs to be able to do. So to grow, to reproduce, whatever it might be. Right? So cellular respiration occurs in all cells, but photosynthesis only occurs in plant cells because they're and other cells that have chloroplasts. Now, you need to know what kind of a role it has in the overall ecosystem, in the environment. So this first part here, we've got for photosynthesis, we need to have water and carbon dioxide and sunlight. That makes photosynthesis. That produces, you remember that glucose over here, and it also produces oxygen as a byproduct. And the good thing is, photosynthesis is basically the reverse of cellular respiration. So all of those products here can then be used in respiration, cellular respiration, to make energy. And that energy is going to be used for anything it needs to do. And that happens for both plant and animal cells. And then the cycle continues because animal cells release carbon dioxide and plant cells do as well when they do photosynthesis. So that's a cycle that will keep going and going and going. So that's photosynthesis and cellular respiration, and that's what we need to know about those two concepts.